What started as a pretty simple question, where did the evidence come from that Meghan Markle's community cookbook and kitchen project that she was involved with was tied to 19 jihadists come from? But of course, it's never that simple. So while this is going to be a series that does talk about the Grenfell Fires, the project, it's really about the media reporting, journalistic integrity, and Islamophobia. So let's get into it. First, a little background. On June 14th, 2017, a high-rise fire broke out in the 24-story Grenfell Tower blocks of flats in North Kensington, West London. 72 people died, including 2 who later died in hospital, with more than 70 others being injured and 223 people escaping. Residents had been complaining about safety concerns for years. Those were never taken seriously, and mostly an immigrant population lived there. Born out of this tragedy was the Hub Community Project, which was created by women seeking somewhere to cook fresh food for their friends and family. Meghan ends up getting incredibly involved with this group. She comes back several times to volunteer, roll up her sleeves, get involved, and eventually she partners with the women to create a cookbook to sell so that they can make more money for the community kitchen to open more days per week. But it doesn't take long for these kind of headlines to start appearing. Meghan's community kitchen housed in a mosque linked to 19 jihadists. From The Sun, terror link. Meghan Markle's cookbook mosque linked to 19 jihadis, including ISIS Beatles executioners. The one thing I noticed in the articles was that they link to the Telegraph for their reporting on the subject. And I am going to assume that they did this to remove any legal responsibility. But it's also really bad journalism not to do your due diligence and research before you write an article. So obviously I had to go look at the Telegraph. Here's the article from the Telegraph. Meghan cookbook mosque linked to 19 terror suspects, including Jihadi John in group's investigation. It's by one Camilla Tominey. That's a name I've seen before. I haven't done a lot of research into her, but trust me, we will be going there. Not right now, that will be another video, but we will be looking into her. So here's what it says farther down in the article, which people don't read a full article, so okay. Research by the HJS suggests the mosque was once attended by 3 of the 4 Beatles, and it goes on to say who these people are. Okay. Research suggests doesn't mean research confirms. This is particular warning, but then I said, what is the HJS? Because every article talks about them. And that is going to be for the next video. Let's get into the HJS, also known as the Henry Jackson Society. I found several articles that say that the Henry Jackson Society was partially started by Prince Charles in 2001. I want to be clear, either the internet has been scrubbed of this information or that is not true, but I can't even figure out where it would come from. From everything I could find, it was started in March of 2005 by academics and students at Cambridge. So here's some of their statement of principles. Again, what's weird is I've seen in other places they say that they don't want to take military action. They want to find other ways first, but then they talk about maintaining a strong military. Again, a lot of it sounds very imperialist, forcing our form of government onto other countries. That always goes very well. Number 7, though, gives 2 cheers for capitalism. Okay. And although they try to position themselves as this forward-thinking, human rights-focused think tank, some of their researchers and speakers in the last couple of years tell a different story. For an American, the fact that you have former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Senator Marco Rubio among those that have spoken and contributed to your research doesn't give me good feels. These people are not known for their forward, liberal thinking, anti-war, human rights focused points of view. But maybe the group started out with these intentions, but it seemed like a shift happened. And here's where it happened. Douglas Martin, a man that I unfortunately had to dig into, and boy howdy, it's not great. He founded the Center for Social Cohesion in 2007, which eventually becomes a part of the Henry Jackson Society sometime between 2008 to 2010. He then becomes the Associate Director from 2011 to 2018 of the HJS. Here are some of his thoughts on Muslims from 2006. This was from a speech. Conditions for Muslims in Europe must be made harder across the board. Europe must look like a less attractive proposition. From long before we first attacked, it should have been made plain that people who come into Europe are here under our rules and not theirs. Where a mosque has become a center of hate, it should be closed and pulled down. If that means that some Muslims don't have a mosque to go to, then they'll just have to realize that they aren't owed one. He also said white British people are losing their country. So this is the direction that HJS is heading into. We're going to get more into HJS, some of the fallout, some of the critique, and then we're going to get back into the media reporting. Stay tuned. A little more on HJS. I didn't have time to read this entire 84-page research paper from the Cordoba Foundation, but it's called The Henry Jackson Society and the Denigration of British Neoconservatism. Again, I am very weird and very interested in this, but it's a holiday week, and it's my birthday week, and I have children. I do not have time for 84 pages on neoconservatism right now. It'll be a post-holiday treat. One of the co-authors of this paper, Hilary Aked, said of the Henry Jackson Society that it had an inglorious history of propagating questionable research and targeting Muslims with spurious extremism smears. But it's important to note, even among the founding members, Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's a name to remember, is another person who has had anti-Muslim statements. So it sounds like maybe the coalition that had those leanings and then bringing on Douglas Murray just further fueled that sentiment. Co-founder Matthew Jameson wrote in 2017 that he was ashamed of his involvement, having never imagined the Henry Jackson Society would become, quote, a far-right, deeply anti-Muslim, racist propaganda outfit to smear other cultures, religions, and ethnic groups. He claimed that the HJS for many years has relentlessly demonized Muslims and Islam. But I really wanted to understand what the research was from HJS that led to this conclusion that Meghan was basically aiding and abetting terrorists, according to the media. So I go to the website, I go into research, Advancing the Free World Center on Radicalization and Terrorism, and I think, oh, this might be interesting. So right away, almost everything is focused on Al-Qaeda, radical terrorism, Hindu-Muslim civil unrest. It's all very Muslim focused. And I was scrolling for quite some time because I was looking for something around 2017, 2018 specifically. And what's interesting is there is nothing there about domestic, homegrown, white extremism, which is a really big problem. But no, they're only focused on Muslims. I wonder why. And a former member, Marco Hore, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, does call this to question when he says that they have shown no equivalent concern with white or Christian extremism. There are no articles on its website concerning groups like the British National Party or the EDL. He goes on to say that he did try to post about the Norway killings in 2011 by Anders Breivik, a white man. And that once he did, his articles were revoked and his permission to post on the HJS was revoked as well. So I decided to take a guess and clicked on the foreign-funded Islamist extremism in the UK to see if that's where the research came from. Cool. I tried opening it in different browsers on different devices, same thing. And there seems to be a lot of dead ends on the website. Stay tuned for more. Let's get back to the newspapers. So again, this is way down in the Telegraph article, and nobody reads full articles anyway. Research by the HJS suggests the mosque was once attended by 3 of the 4 Beatles, which is an ISIL tower cell, not the Beatles, obviously. Research suggests, does not prove, it does not conclude, it suggests. And note, this article and every other article I found does not actually quote the research. So while I couldn't find the research a couple years later for whatever reason, they don't even bother to quote it. And all it actually says is that 3 extremists might have attended this mosque. This mosque where the community hub was renting out space so that they could make meals for other people who had lost everything in a fire in a tower that mostly housed immigrants that probably could have been prevented. This is a great example of how we ask Black and brown people to represent every single Black and brown person in the world who does something bad. But we never ask that of white people. But the other thing I kept seeing was this: experts say the Duchess of Sussex has been poorly advised and a simple internet search should have raised some questions. Okay, what experts? So I went back to the article in the Telegraph, and it seems like Dr. Alan Mendoza, remember, I said to remember that name, executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, said the Duchess of Sussex has been poorly advised over her involvement with a mosque where many former congregants have gone on to commit terrorist acts. This is not one or two isolated cases, but 19 separate individuals. A simple Google search would have highlighted concerns over these connections and the recently expressed views of Imam Darwish. So, it would conclude, since these are the exact words that we just saw, this is the expert, who also happens to be tied to the research supposedly done to prove all of this. The final part of this video will go over the palace response and some closing thoughts. So after all these articles, I obviously wanted to see, what did Buckingham Palace have to say about it? And as far as I can tell, officially they said nothing. But some of the articles do note at the end that a Kensington Palace source said the funds raised by the Cookbook are supporting the Hub Community Kitchen, which is an independent project that leases space from Al-Manar. The project is empowering the women and helping provide some hope and joy to a community that has gone through unspeakable tragedy. I mean, it's not a terrible statement. It doesn't say anything about Meghan Markle, but I also don't understand why it wasn't just an official statement. Why is it a source? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I just found that kind of curious. It just grinds my gear, the lack of due diligence and basic journalism 101 that it seems you don't need to have with some of these publications. And yes, you can say that some of these are tabloids and people don't take tabloids seriously, but guess what? Tabloids are everywhere. So you're seeing this headline. Maybe you don't even have time to read it that quickly, but you see Meghan, Islamic terrorism, and you might say, oh, she's done it again. Not to mention the fact that these publications are part of the royal rota. And I have to ask, why? If they're not legitimate and no one takes them seriously, why are they given this credibility? Sorry, I hit my stand gesticulating too wildly. With headlines like these, they are hoping you don't read farther into it. They are hoping to feed off the fears of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant sentiment. It's also a convenient way to put a dark cloud over this exceptional work Meghan Markle is doing with this community. So let's say a person just reads down a little farther. Research by the HJS suggests. You're like, oh, well, this sounds official. I mean, it's based on research. And there's probably some level of trust you have that the journalist reporting on this story has actually looked at the research. But we don't see any proof of that. It's racist, it's xenophobic, and it's simply bad journalism. And it just I don't know. This is a little personal. I didn't go into journalism because one of the reasons was it felt like a very grave responsibility reporting the truth and getting everything right. And that felt like a massive responsibility to the public. But clearly it just doesn't matter in some cases because this is wild. I started this because I just wanted to know why these headlines came about and what the research was suggesting this connection. At the end of the day, it is a tenuous relationship between a mosque and potentially some extremists linked to the kitchen that is renting out space from the mosque to do some good and provide some comfort and familiarity in their community.